There are a variety of marks and applications you can use with acrylic. The best thing about acrylic is its versatility. It can mimic both oil and watercolor. With the right brush application and the right medium, you can create a variety of effects. Sometimes beginners believe that a painting surface is supposed to be smooth. This impression may have come from looking at reproductions of paintings or those of a particular period of art history. However, you should expect brushstrokes will leave some imprint on your surface when you paint. Ultimately, brushstrokes and textures should be left up to the artist's preference and what they're trying to express. In this module, we'll be exploring applications and techniques that you can use in painting with acrylics. For a medium consistency paint, acrylic paint will naturally give you a smooth surface. To begin, dip the bristles in your medium, then deposit it onto the palette. Then mix them together. Add a little medium until the brush slides around on the palette easily. Too little medium can cause your brush to drag, but too much medium can dilute your colors and affect your opacity. As you can see here, I'm laying down nice even brush strokes. The opacity of the color is fairly smooth and uniform. However, when I add a lot more medium to it, it becomes lighter and the brush strokes are more visible. Washes are the basis of watercolor painting. You can simulate a watercolor technique by layering acrylic washes to create new color impressions. This technique isn't just used for watercolor, though. When beginning a painting, you can start with thin wash layers for practical reasons, as you'll get a quick look at the overall painting without applying thick, hard-to-remove coats. This will also allow you to paint over the washes more easily than thick paint if you need to adjust it. To achieve a wash, you'll add more medium to your brush than you will with medium consistency. You should mix the results on your palette to homogenize the combination and dilute any thick paint left in the brush. Add enough medium to create a small tinted puddle with no paint blobs or streaks. The color won't be as strong or as intense as straight from the tube, but be aware how your paint is acting if you're working on an upright surface. If your paint is too wet, it will move around too much. This can be solved by pre-moistening the paper before adding your wash to control the flow of color. To lift off a color or to lighten it from a still wet wash, apply a bit of water or medium with a soft bristled brush, then use a towel to remove the excess. Wet on wet is another basic technique used in acrylic painting. Wet on wet gives a soft, diffused look. It's used to create bleeds and blooms between areas of color, and it will allow acrylic paint to spread and blend. We'll start by adding water to the surface, and then using a brush loaded with medium, let the surface water spread the medium throughout. When a wash is used over dry paint, whether on top of another wash or opaquely painted area, it's called a glaze. In this first section, I'm using these magenta lines to show how your paint may not be as opaque right out of the tube. Several application or glazes have to be applied in order for the opacity to increase. When beginning a full painting, your colors and washes may not be as thick or as opaque as you'd like. Glazing like this is a way to raise the opacity of your colors. To demonstrate how glazing works to change the hue and value of paint, I am applying horizontal washes of various colors. I've allowed each layer to dry before completely glazing on top of them. Notice how the value and hue are altered by what's being painted over them. In this way, you can utilize your acrylic in a similar way to watercolor by playing with washes on top of washes to create depth and mix colors in the eye. The terms hard edge and soft edge are used to describe two different ways in which objects can be painted. A hard edge is the term used when an edge of an object is painted in a well-defined or definite way. There are multiple ways to achieve hard edges, either through pulling paint along the edge of a shape or masking off that shape. Hard edge gives the viewer a strong sense of where the object ends. A soft edge is when you paint so that it disappears or fades into another color and is often achieved with either dry brush, washes, or wet into wet. To explore other applications of paint, we'll start with dry brush. This is where you load your brush with your liquid medium and paint, then exhaust all the paint out of the brush without reloading either paint or medium. If you apply dry brush over a dried underpainting, an optical mixture is created because both top and bottom layers are seen simultaneously due to the rough texture of the dry brush. Note here how I have a full loaded brush and am exhausting the material out. Notice how the background of the paper is seen more and more through the exhaustion of the medium. Another way to imply shade or to blend is wet in wet techniques. They're useful for creating shadows and painting in general. When using wet in wet techniques, the paint in both the light area and the shadow area is wet. Depending on the open time or the speed the paint dries, and being ready to go with your steps clearly in mind so you can work while the paint is receptive, you can be successful in this technique. Sgraffito is a good technique for adding graphic elements into your painting. By applying thick layers of paint and then taking a tool like the back of your brush or palette knife, you can carve into a semi-wet surface and provide drawing elements into your painting. Here I'm using the back of my brush to crosshatch. Different sized tools can make different sized marks. Notice how small the palette knife's marks are compared to the back of the thick brush. Another good thing about this technique is you can paint over any undesired effects. It will mostly erase the image, and then you can work back into it. Be aware, however, that your surface can only take so much damage, so be mindful not to overwork your surfaces. Stippling is a technique where you apply short strokes and make little marks with the tip of your brush. Think polka dots. Any brush can be used depending on the area you want to fill. Pointed brushes make the job easier, so think something like a small round brush. The marks can often be dots, but they may be any shape as long as they're small and brief. It's a useful technique, though generally not applied all over the painting, with the notable historical exception of the pointillist. Stippling is used to create the impression of texture. You can create an optical mix when stipples have different colors and are applied close to each other or overlap. The result is an impression of a new color. Notice how the blue and the red interact and create a darker hue than both of them had combined. When I add a little bit of yellow, it softens the red a bit and becomes a little more orange. Stippling is a great way to blend colors without actually having to use wet on wet or glazes. Impasto is a great way to build surface texture quickly. Impasto is the act of applying thick areas of paint. You can achieve this with taking a large glob of paint with your palette knife and applying it to the surface of your work and kind of building it up sculpturally. Impasto can also be done by using a brush. Similar to Van Gogh's work, you can use thin lines of thick color to have a hatching effect. Impasto will catch light and shadow from its surrounding, creating depth in your work. Impasto is also another great way to work wet into wet, blending these colors together. Drips can be used in a few ways, from stylized graphic elements to adding a different type of texture in your work. To create drips, you essentially want to overload your brush with a paint medium combination similar to how you would approach a wash. Only in this case, your brush should be overloaded. While washes are best made on a semi-flat surface, having your work upright or at a 90-degree angle will provide enough gravity for the paint to move in these drips. You can also move drips by blowing on the surface of your work to control the flow of the medium. You can create different marks with methods other than brushes. For example, you can try painting with some paper towels dripped in paint. Try this technique to create the impression of foliage texture in landscapes. You can also experiment with the simple act of wiping paint off a painting surface to create transparent effects. By layering darker paints on top of the lighter paints, you can create a little bit of depth with this simple technique. Masking and stenciling are two good techniques for isolating shapes from applications of paint. You can use rubber cement, tape, or just cut out a stencil. Be careful about applying the tape, then removing it, because you don't want to tear your paper. Stenciling is similar to masking, except it is a free-form object. You can purchase stencils at most craft stores or you can make them yourselves. I'm just using this simple piece of paper to block off the application of paint. As you can see, it completely blocked it. The edges may not be super sharp, but they're there. Again, be careful when removing your tape. One of the best things about stencils is they are often reusable to a point. So in one single work, you can layer stencils. Here I am using the same piece of paper, using the other side, but using overlap, you can create a lot more depth to your work just using stencils. Splatter effect, or toothbrushing, is pretty self-descriptive. To achieve this effect, load your brush with paint and medium, then flick the bristles towards the surface of the painting. It's fairly messy, as it'll get your fingers just as covered with paint as the surface, but the outcome is dynamic, and with the right application it can be used for textures, or creating irregular dot patterns such as stars in the night sky. Splattering can be a little unpredictable, so sometimes it's smart to use masking or stencil to get the shape you want. With these simple techniques, you will have the basic toolkit to creating a variety of textures and applications of paint. These are basic building blocks of paint application, and the most important part of moving paint around is enjoying the textural feel of the medium. With this in mind, explore the ways you can make marks with paint and your brushes.